If you are...
All right, let's get started again. So a little bit of a commercial for really getting everybody standing up. One of our clients that we're working with in Canada, their public health folks have actually started instituting within regional government walking meetings. The public health unit in this municipality has noted that their long-term progress or lack of progress is in 30 years, 60% of their municipal budget will be spent on some kind of primary care for people with diabetes, and they want to change the culture of the organization. So they're starting now forcing employees to walk up the steps if they have the mobility to do that. They're doing meetings on different floors. They're doing all kinds of things just to get people moving. But the one takeaway is the medical officer of health has told me that the studies have shown if you sit down for more than 3 hours a day, you're probably taking a day off your life. Like they've now quantified the length of time you spend sitting in your office to your life expectancy. It's a useless piece of trivia, but we probably spend all of our days sitting down. So the last 3 days while Dan and Peter and RJ and everybody else has been working with folks getting your input, we've actually had a team of folks in the secret back room, that big gym back there, taking the ideas that have been coming out, taking all of the good things, all the examples that Dan and Peter have shown, and actually bringing it down to Woodward Avenue itself, the corridor and design. Where we started actually is to look at all 27 miles and to get a framework of the area, to look at what's going on. You have some very unique, distinct places. They're beautiful, they're historic. There's lots of quality that we want to emphasize in our complete street design. Also, because these places are unique, as Peter noted, there are locations where cycle tracks may be appropriate in this corridor. There are also locations where a painted bicycle lane may be the more appropriate response. The traditional roadway design, particularly for regional facilities, has been sort of the one-size-fits-all. You take a section and you extrude it for 27 miles, and whether you're going next to a school or a main street, everything looks the same. As Dan said, we're entering a time where we understand a little bit more about this, and we recognize the importance, the value that streets can bring to our communities. So what we did is we looked all 27 miles and we said, where are the important things? Where are the downtowns? Where are the parks? Where are the cemeteries? And how should the road respond to those locations? I'm going to start off with two important caveats. These are starter ideas. Anything we show here is changeable. We want to hear a response. We want to know, can we do this a little bit better? There's nothing in stone. People aren't going to put this to tender tomorrow to build in the next year. These are ideas to talk about. They're conversation starters. The other thing is, with the Woodward alternatives analysis going on for the rolling rapid transit, we kind of took the liberty to say, what is the most complicated condition that we may encounter in the future, and sort of designed to that. So we're looking at things that work in the short term, but also things, ideas, solutions that may be able to work in the long term. Again, the alternatives analysis is early on, and it may evolve into different ideas. Barb, if you can emphasize how it's an evolutionary process. What we did is we looked at examples that we think are very complicated, that need to be solved in the future, that we can adjust appropriately. I'm going to call on a lot of people as we go through this, because we had a whole bunch of people joining the next rooms. One of the first things we did is we looked at these sort of special areas. This is McNichols Road at Woodward, and we started thinking about what the area is going to be, what the area is currently. As with the alternatives analysis, somebody told me earlier, just as an aside, to not say AA, which is the jargon we use for alternatives analysis.
Church.
Yes, because everybody assumed it was Alcoholics Anonymous, but it's alternatives analysis in this jargon. When you think about this intersection, and you look at the influence of the intersection, that sort of quarter-mile radius that I think both Dan and Peter emphasized, when you think about that, what are the things we can do within this area to Woodward Avenue to make it more walkable, bikeable, to still accommodate all of the motor vehicle uses that we have to accommodate? And we look at specific things. So at 6 Mile, when you consider you're going from the median section down to that very constrained section as you go south and Barb, I've forgotten what's south of 6 Mile. You told me not to say.
Highland Park.
Highland Park, yes. I'm from Toronto, so I don't know the community that well. I apologize for that. But we have to actually understand how you transition from this sort of wide condition to this narrow condition and opportunities for crossing at that location. So our recurring theme here will be, how do you actually bridge the divide that is Woodward Avenue to get people from one side to the other side? And what are the opportunities? What does that look like? So from a redevelopment perspective, you know, the buildings frame the street. He concluded on that sort of point. What do we do? What can we infill in these locations to give some verticality to the corridor? And in this example, I think, Dorian, you added a building here?
Yeah, well, we had a couple of
Infill buildings.
Yeah, everything you see that's in color is part of the new strategy on the corridor. And the buildings that are in white are some of the existing neighborhoods and some of the existing commercial frontage.
So as Peter alluded to earlier, that vertical element actually helps to trigger a response in drivers where they want to slow down. The idea is, when you look at Woodward, in some sections, it's like a bowling alley. It's very straight, it's very wide, and it's very open. And from a calming perspective, you actually want to force people to start focusing on the mid and near ground, not on the far ground, because that's what influences people to go slower. So if you have these wide rights of ways with nothing for people to focus on forever, they'll travel fast. If you put vertical elements into the streetscape, it tends to force people's eyes to a closer location, and they want to drive slower. So it's very important to think of those vertical elements. Along the way at 6 Mile by the park, I think, is this Palmer Park?
The park is up at the very top, and the bottom is the same intersection.
So this is the park, and this is the
It's
intersection.
showing
we're
the
just looking at.
transition as the street comes down.
There's an area here where there's a lot of real estate taken up by road at the entry of the park, and there's a little bit, there's some redundancy there that in the future may be able to be cleaned up. And the idea there is the more openings to the adjacent community or to driveways, things like that, if we can consolidate some of those things, it actually makes it very easy for cyclists not to have to navigate through multiple openings. It also allows, from a motor vehicle perspective, you have less friction, you have less side friction. So there's opportunities along the corridor to make some of these changes. And I'm going to fly through some of these for a second. This is, we're at 7 Mile now, and what was very interesting about this, as we think into the future as a potential station, when you look at what this is and the potential investment here at the intersection, really you're impacting 3 quadrants of the circle. The final quadrant, there's actually not a lot of density, there's not a lot of pedestrians being generated. As a destination, it's a great destination, but from a transit perspective, there's not a lot of things going on there, so the investment is really about the areas around that. One of the things we talked about a lot was the sort of skewed condition of Woodward and how streets intersect on this skew. From a pedestrian crossing perspective, when you look at a skew and pedestrians cross like this, the distance from here to here is much greater than the distance from here to here. So earlier RJ alluded to the fact that we want to narrow the distances pedestrians cross. And if we can align some of these these skewed roads so they're more perpendicular to Woodward, we can decrease the crossing distance of pedestrians. And here's a brief example of what that could look like.
And remember, that can make traffic move better too, because the delay time is shorter, so the stoplight will actually be shorter.
Yes, so operationally it works very well for the corridor. And here we're at the at 8 Mile State Fairgrounds. We didn't spend a lot of time actually looking at the State Fairground area. There's a lot of conversation going on right now, and that conversation needs to happen, and it needs to happen among you folks, not among us. And there's plenty of things that we can do as these plans evolve. One thing to consider again, though, is you have a historic facility, the first urban freeway in the world, I heard, in North America. I don't know what it was. This is the second time I've said this today. So I'm 2 for 2. But you have the great separated interchange there. The bigger point is you actually don't even have connectivity. You have one area that's completely disconnected from that area through Woodward and the grade separation. You have another area that's separated through grade separation. So you have 4 areas here that are separate and distinct on their own because of the transportation infrastructure. And in the future, when you think about walkability, how do you try to connect these separated infrastructure pieces? And probably, I think from an urban perspective, one of the most interesting intersections here you have is at 9 Mile here in Ferndale. And looking at the opportunities for that sort of, where does the cycle track go? I know there's been discussion about, is it the parklet? Or extending the area in front of businesses out into the parking area to give a little bit more space out front of the businesses. There's all kinds of conversations going on there. We've done capacity analysis. Hanover here has been working diligently to see the amount of lanes necessary, and there'll be some conversation about the amount of lanes that are really necessary and where parking can be allowed and how much more space you can have for pedestrians to occupy space and also to shorten their distance across Woodward. One of the things that we considered is we have to look at this in the short, medium, and long term, and a huge consideration, particularly for the rolling rapid transit, is, and again, we've looked at sort of a complicated condition. If you put rolling rapid transit down the center median, you have what we call the Michigan left. I think you guys call it the indirect lefts. When you have the rolling rapid transit going down the median, we now have an issue where if you wanted to turn left and you have to drive through the intersections to turn left, and there's a bus that's actually coming down the median, you have to stop and wait for the bus. And here's the condition. If we're all driving north, and then I want to go south and I get into this turnaround in the median, well, usually all I'm focused at is oncoming traffic. But now I have to focus on the oncoming traffic, and I actually have to make a second move to look behind me because there may actually be a bus that's paralleling me. As I turn, it's going, we're going to meet in an undesirable way. So we have to really think about what these intersections look like in the future. We may be able to still accommodate the indirect lefts, the Michigan lefts, but in the future we may actually have to think about at Ferndale and other locations the consideration maybe you would have to start turning left at real intersections, not these indirect lefts. And we have to think this through. As the alternatives analysis progresses, people will have to take a hard look at that and the operational implications of